The trailer door slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid, but the space inside remained empty. Maple's hooves struck the gravel like thunder, her massive frame trembling as she backed away from the metal contraption that had become her prison sentence. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Holloway farm, but nothing could illuminate the darkness that had settled over this place in recent months. Jasper Holloway stood beside the trailer, his weathered hands shaking as he wiped sweat from his brow. At 63, he had loaded thousands of horses into trailers, but today felt different. Today felt like surrender. The foreclosure notice crumpled in his back pocket seemed to whisper with each gust of wind, reminding him that the 17-hand Clydesdale mare wasn't just refusing to load, she was refusing to accept the inevitable. "Come on, girl," Jasper whispered, his voice cracking like autumn leaves. "We don't have a choice anymore." But Maple stood firm, her intelligent brown eyes reflecting something that went beyond mere stubbornness. 3 different handlers had tried to coax her into the trailer over the past hour. Each attempt had ended with the same result: hooves planted like tree roots, nostrils flaring, and a 1,000-pound statement that some things were worth fighting for. The auction house truck idled nearby, its driver checking his watch with increasing impatience. This was supposed to be a simple pickup, just another horse heading to market. But Maple wasn't just another horse. She was the last connection to everything Jasper had built over for decades of farming. His granddaughter, Brielle, watched from the porch steps, her 12-year-old frame curled into itself like a question mark. She had been the one to name Maple 7 years ago, when the foal arrived during the last good season. Before the drought, before the medical bills, before everything began to crumble like sand through desperate fingers, Grandpa Joe. Brielle called out, using the nickname she'd given him before she could pronounce Jasper properly. "Maybe she knows something we don't." The words hit him like a physical blow. Children, in their brutal honesty, often spoke truths that adults spent lifetimes avoiding. Maple did know something. She knew that this farm was her home, that the rolling pastures beyond the barn held memories of summer afternoons and winter storms weathered together. She knew that stepping into that trailer meant leaving behind everything that made her who she was. Jasper approached slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. Maple's ears swiveled toward him, but her body remained rigid. He reached out, letting his palm rest against her neck, feeling the warmth that had comforted him through countless early mornings and late nights. "I know, girl," he murmured. "I know this isn't right." The truck driver honked his horn, a sharp blast that made Maple's muscles tense further. The auction house had been clear. Pickup was scheduled for 10 a.m., and delays cost money. But as Jasper looked into Maple's eyes, he saw something that made his heart skip, not fear, but hope. She was waiting for him to remember who he used to be, before the weight of loss had bent him into someone who gave up. The morning air carried the scent of hay and possibility, and for the first time in months, Jasper Holloway began to wonder if surrender was really the only option left. 3 hours later, the truck driver had left empty-handed, muttering about stubborn farmers and their stubborn horses. The auction house would charge a missed pickup fee, but Jasper couldn't bring himself to care. He sat on the fence rail, watching Maple graze in the pasture as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't tried to steal her away just hours before. Brielle approached with 2 glasses of sweet tea, her footsteps careful on the uneven ground. "Mom called," she said quietly. "She's driving down from Minneapolis tonight." Jasper's daughter, Cordelia, had been pushing for the farm's sale for months, a successful architect. She saw the property as nothing more than numbers on a balance. Sheet acreage that could be subdivided, assets that could be liquidated. She couldn't understand why her father clung to a dying way of life. When a comfortable retirement in town awaited him, "She's going to be mad about the truck," Brielle continued, settling beside him on the fence. "Let her be mad," Jasper replied, surprised by the strength in his own voice. "Some things are worth being mad about." The afternoon sun painted the pasture in shades of gold, and Maple moved through it like a living sculpture. She had been born during the worst blizzard in county history, when the power was out and the roads were impassable. Jasper had stayed up all night in the barn, helping her mother through a difficult labor. When Maple finally arrived, slick and trembling, she had looked up at him with eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. "Tell me about when you were young, Grandpa Joe," Brielle said, swinging her legs from the fence rail. Jasper smiled, remembering. "When I was your age, this farm was my whole world. My daddy bought it from a railroad company in 1962, and I used to ride the fence line every morning before school. There were 43 horses then, and I knew every one by name." He pointed toward the old oak tree that dominated the center of the pasture. "I buried my first horse under that tree, Old Thunder. He was a stallion who thought he was still young even at 25. Threw me more times than I can count. But he also taught me everything I know about earning respect instead of demanding it." Brielle listened with the intensity that only children possess, absorbing every detail like a sponge. "Is that why Maple won't get in the trailer? Because she knows about Thunder, maybe," Jasper said thoughtfully. "Horses remember things different than we do. They remember feelings, not just facts. And this place, it holds a lot of feelings." The memories came flooding back Christmas mornings, when the horse's breath made clouds in the cold air. Summer evenings when fireflies danced above the pasture. Autumn afternoons when the leaves crunched under hooves and boots alike. This farm had been the backdrop for his wedding, for Cordelia's first steps, for countless moments that had shaped the man he'd become. "The bank man came by yesterday," Brielle said suddenly. "I saw him talking to Mom on the phone after." Jasper's chest tightened. He had hoped to shield his granddaughter from the worst of it, but children were observant creatures. They sensed tension the way horses sensed storms. "What did you think of him?" Jasper asked. "He wore a suit that looked like it had never been dirty," Brielle replied. "And he kept looking at his phone instead of at you when you were talking, out of the mouths of babes." The banker, Dexter Morrison, had been professional but cold, explaining the foreclosure timeline with the detached efficiency of someone who had delivered the same speech countless times. He spoke of market realities and asset optimization, as if the farm were nothing more than a business venture gone wrong. But Jasper knew better. This farm was a living thing, with roots that ran deeper than any mortgage. It was the place where for generations of Holloways had learned the rhythm of seasons, the language of animals, the satisfaction of work that meant something beyond a paycheck. As the shadows lengthened, Maple approached the fence, her massive head reaching over to nuzzle Jasper's shoulder. Her touch was gentle, questioning, as if she were asking what came next. "I don't know, girl," he whispered, "but I'm starting to think you might have the right idea about not giving up." Cordelia's silver sedan pulled into the driveway at sunset, its pristine exterior looking out of place against the weathered barn and faded fencing. She emerged wearing a black pantsuit and an expression that could have frozen July, her heels clicking against the gravel like a countdown timer. "Dad, what happened today?" she demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "The auction house called my office. They said you refused to load Maple." Jasper sat in his favorite rocking chair on the porch, whittling a piece of cedar while Brielle curled up beside him with a book. The peaceful scene only seemed to amplify Cordelia's frustration. "I didn't refuse anything," Jasper said quietly. "Maple made her own choice. Horses don't make choices, Dad. They follow commands. And right now, we need that money from her sale to keep the bank from taking everything else." Brielle looked up from her book, her young face troubled. She had heard this argument before, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, it felt final. "Maybe we could find another way," Brielle suggested hesitantly. "Maybe we could." "Honey, there's no other way," Cordelia interrupted, her voice softening slightly when she addressed her daughter. "Grandpa Joe is 73 years old. He can't maintain a farm this size anymore, and we can't afford to keep paying for something that doesn't generate income. I'm 63, not 73, Jasper corrected mildly, "and I may be getting older, but I'm not dead yet." Cordelia sighed, the sound carrying years of accumulated worry. "Dad, you had a heart attack last spring. Your arthritis is getting worse, and the farm hasn't turned a profit in 3 years. Sometimes holding on isn't brave, it's just stubborn." The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Jasper continued whittling, his gnarled hands moving with practiced precision. The piece of cedar was beginning to take shape a horse's head, elegant and proud. You know what your mother used to say? Jasper asked suddenly. She used to say that some things were worth more than money, that a man's legacy wasn't measured in dollars, but in the lives he touched and the land he left better than he found it. Cordelia's expression softened momentarily. Her mother, Magnolia, had died 5 years earlier, and her absence still echoed through the farmhouse like a bell that had stopped ringing. Mom also used to say that wisdom meant knowing when to let go. Cordelia replied gently. She wouldn't want you to sacrifice your health and your future for a piece of land. And she wouldn't want me to abandon something I love just because. It's difficult, Jasper countered. The argument might have continued, but Maple chose that moment to approach the porch. Her hooves made soft sounds on the grass, and she extended her neck over the railing to investigate the newcomer. Cordelia instinctively stepped back, but Maple's eyes were gentle, curious. She's bigger than I remembered, Cordelia murmured. She's grown into herself, Jasper said proudly. Draft horses don't reach their full size until they're 7 or 8. She's in her prime now. Brielle reached out to stroke Maple's nose, and the horse lowered her head to accept the attention. She likes you, Mom, Brielle said hopefully. Maybe she remembers when you used to visit more often. The comment wasn't meant to sting, but Cordelia winced anyway. Her career had consumed more and more of her time over the years, and visits to the farm had become increasingly rare. She had convinced herself that this was maturity prioritizing practical concerns over sentimental attachments. I used to write her mother, Cordelia said quietly, when I was about your age, Brielle. Her name was Clover, and she was the gentlest horse I'd ever met. What happened to her? Brielle asked. She died when Maple was 3, Jasper replied. Colic. Sometimes things just happen, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. The parallel wasn't lost on any of them. Death was one thing, an inevitable part of life that had to be accepted. But choosing to give up, choosing to surrender something precious, because it was difficult, that was different. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Cordelia found herself really looking at the farm for the first time in years. The way the old oak tree stood sentinel over the pasture, the way the barn's weathered boards told stories of countless storms weathered and seasons survived, the way Maple moved through the grass like poetry in motion. I need to make some calls, she said finally. The bank, the auction house, maybe we can buy ourselves some time. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. And sometimes that was enough. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Cordelia had spent half the night on the phone, and now 3 people sat around the kitchen table, drinking coffee and studying papers scattered across the worn oak surface. Quincy Vance, a local veterinarian, in his 40s, pushed his glasses up his nose as he reviewed a stack of documents. Beside him, Marlo Jenkins, a young woman with paint-stained fingers and eyes full of fire, sketched ideas on a legal pad. The third visitor was Ulysses Brennan, a retired businessman who had recently moved to the area and was looking for meaningful ways to invest his time and money. The numbers are challenging, but not impossible, Quincy said, tapping his pen against the table. If we can establish the farm as a therapeutic riding center, we might qualify for grants and donations that could offset the mortgage payments. Marlo looked up from her sketching. I've been working with special needs children in the city for 3 years. There's a huge demand for equine therapy, and this place has everything we'd need: space, facilities, and most importantly, the right kind of horses. Jasper sat quietly, listening to these young people discuss his farm with the enthusiasm he'd forgotten he possessed. Brielle perched on the counter, swinging her legs and absorbing every word. What about liability insurance? Cordelia asked, her practical mind already identifying obstacles. And staffing and certification requirements, all manageable. Ulysses replied in his measured way. I've been involved in several nonprofit ventures over the years. The key is starting small and building gradually. We wouldn't need to serve hundreds of clients immediately, just enough to prove the concept and establish a revenue stream. The conversation continued for hours, gradually transforming from desperate brainstorming into something resembling a real plan. Maple seemed to sense the shift in energy. Approaching the kitchen window and peering inside as if she wanted to participate in the discussion. "The horse therapy angle is brilliant," Marlowe said, her excitement evident. "Draft horses like Maple are perfect for this work. They're calm, intelligent, and their size makes them less intimidating to children than you might think. Kids feel safe with them because they move slowly and deliberately." "But will it generate enough income?" Cordelia pressed. "Dad still has to eat, still has to pay utilities and property taxes." "That's where the boarding aspect comes in," Quincy explained. "We keep the therapeutic riding as the primary mission, but we also offer boarding services for local horse owners. Between the two revenue streams, plus potential grants and donations, we could make this work." Jasper finally spoke up. "What about Maple? In all this planning, nobody's asked what happens to her." The room fell silent. It was a fair question, and the answer would determine whether this entire venture was worth pursuing. She'd be the star. Marlowe said simply, the therapy program would be built around her. She'd have purpose, respect, and a home for the rest of her life. And when she gets too old for the work, Jasper asked, "Then she retires with dignity," Ulysses replied. "This wouldn't be a business that discards animals when they're no longer useful. It would be a sanctuary that values them for who they are, not just what they can produce." The afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the papers and faces around the table. For the first time in months, Jasper felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. "There's one more thing," Brielle said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "Maple would need to approve of this plan. She's the one who started all this by refusing to get in that trailer. Maybe we should ask her what she thinks." It was a child's logic, but it made perfect sense. They had been talking about Maple as if she were a piece of equipment, when she was actually the heart of everything they were trying to preserve. "You know what?" Jasper said, standing up slowly. "I think that's the smartest thing anyone said all day. Let's go ask her." As they filed out of the kitchen, Cordelia caught her father's arm. "Dad, are you sure about this? It's going to be a lot of work, and there are no guarantees." Jasper smiled, looking more like himself than he had in months. "Cordelia, I've been farming for decades. There are never any guarantees, but sometimes, when you've got the right people and the right purpose, you take the leap anyway." Outside, Maple stood waiting in the pasture, as if she had known all along that this moment would come. 2 weeks later, the transformation had begun. The old grain room had been converted into a makeshift office, with Marlowe's therapeutic riding certifications hanging on the wall beside architectural sketches of accessibility improvements. A small sign by the front gate read "Holloway Healing Farm, opening soon," and cars had begun slowing down as they passed, their occupants craning their necks to see what was happening. Maple observed all the activity with the patience of someone who had been expecting this outcome all along. She stood in the center of the pasture like a queen holding court, watching as volunteers repaired fencing, painted buildings, and transformed the old hay barn into a covered riding arena. "She's enjoying this," Jasper observed, leaning against the fence beside Quincy. "Look how she's positioned herself. She can see everything from there." Quincy nodded, making notes on his clipboard. "Draft horses are naturally social animals. They like being part of a community. I think she knows something good is happening here." The first client was scheduled to arrive the following Monday, a 7-year-old boy named Phoenix, who had been struggling with anxiety since his parents' divorce. Marlowe had spent hours preparing, but she was nervous about how Maple would respond to working with children. "She's been around Brielle for years," Jasper reminded her. "She knows how to be gentle with young ones." "But this is different," Marlowe replied. "Therapeutic work requires a special kind of patience. The children we serve often move unpredictably, make sudden noises, or have emotional outbursts. Not every horse can handle that." As if summoned by their conversation, Maple approached the fence. She had been saddled and bridled, but she wore the tack with the dignity of formal attire rather than the resignation of work clothes. "Let's find out what she thinks," Jasper suggested. They opened the gate, and Maple walked through with measured steps. In the arena, Marlowe had set up a simple obstacle course, nothing challenging, just a few ground poles and a small jump. But the real test would be Maple's reaction to uncertainty and change. Brielle appeared in the arena doorway, but she was different somehow. Her movements were jerky, her breathing rapid. She was pretending to be a nervous child, helping Marlo understand how clients might behave during their first session. "I don't want to," Brielle said in a small voice, shrinking away from Maple. "She's too big. I'm scared." Maple's ears swiveled toward the sound, and she stopped walking. For a moment, she simply stood there, processing the fear she sensed. Then, slowly, she lowered her head and took a single step backward, creating more space between herself and the frightened child. "Did you see that?" Marlo breathed. She recognized the fear and gave her space. But Maple wasn't finished. She lowered her head further until her nose was nearly touching the ground and let out a soft whicker, the sound horses make when calling to their foals. It was an invitation, not a demand. Brielle, still playing her role, took a tentative step forward. Maple remained motionless, allowing the child to approach at her own pace. When Brielle finally reached out to touch her nose, Maple exhaled gently, her breath warm against the small hand. "Remarkable," Quincy murmured. "She's a natural therapist." The session continued for another hour, with Maple demonstrating an intuitive understanding of how to work with nervous energy. She moved slowly when Brielle was hesitant, stood perfectly still when the child needed stability, and seemed to sense exactly when to offer comfort versus when to encourage bravery. By the end of the session, even Cordelia was convinced. She had driven down from Minneapolis to observe the trial run, and now she stood in the arena with tears in her eyes. "I haven't seen Dad this happy in years," she told Marlo quietly. "And Brielle, she's like a different child when she's with Maple." "That's the magic of equine therapy," Marlo replied. "Horses don't judge. They don't have expectations. They just respond to what's real and present in the moment." As the sun set over the farm, Jasper walked Maple back to her pasture. The mare moved with the contentment of someone who had found her purpose. She had gone from being a commodity to be sold to being an essential part of something meaningful. "You knew, didn't you?" Jasper asked her quietly. "You knew that getting in that trailer wasn't the answer." Maple's response was to nuzzle his shoulder gently before walking away to join the other horses. But her message was clear. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to give up. As the stars appeared overhead, Jasper felt a deep sense of peace. The farm was still in danger. The financial challenges were still real, and the future was far from certain. But for the first time in months, he believed they had a fighting chance. And that, he realized, was exactly what Maple had been trying to tell him all along. 6 months later, Holloway Healing Farm had become exactly what its name promised: a place where broken things grew whole again. The parking area, once empty except for farm equipment, now held a steady stream of cars as families arrived for their weekly sessions. The old barn had been transformed into a warm, welcoming space with rubber mats, safety equipment, and a small viewing area where parents could watch their children work with the horses. Maple stood in the center of the arena, her patient brown eyes focused on her current client, a teenage girl named Reset, who had been struggling with depression since losing her mother in a car accident. The girl's movements were slow and deliberate, matching the horse's natural rhythm as they worked through a series of ground exercises designed to build trust and confidence. "Can you ask her to take 3 steps forward?" Marlo instructed gently. From the sidelines, Reset placed her hand on Maple's neck and whispered something only the horse could hear. Maple responded immediately, taking exactly 3 measured steps before stopping and turning her head to look at the girl. With what could only be described as encouragement, "She listens to me," Reset said, wonder evident in her voice. "She actually listens. That's because you're speaking her language," Marlo explained. "Horses respond to intention and energy, not just words. She can feel that you're being honest with her." In the viewing area, Jasper watched the session with the satisfaction of a man who had found his true calling. At 63, he had discovered that his greatest skill wasn't growing crops or raising livestock, it was creating a space where healing could happen naturally. The farm now served 12 regular clients, ranging in age from 5 to 17. Each child brought their own challenges: autism, anxiety, ADHD, trauma, grief. But they all shared one thing in common: they responded to Maple's patient presence in ways that traditional therapy had never achieved. "She's remarkable," said Dr. Stella Whitmore, a child psychologist who had begun referring clients to the farm. "I've never seen anything like her intuitive understanding of emotional states. She seems to know exactly what each child needs." Jasper nodded, but his attention was drawn to movement in the distance. A familiar silver sedan was pulling into the driveway. Cordelia, arriving for her weekly visit. Since the farm had reopened, she had begun spending weekends in the country, helping with administrative tasks and reconnecting with the land she had once dismissed as merely sentimental. "How did the session go?" Cordelia asked as she joined them in the viewing area. "See for yourself," Jasper replied, gesturing toward the arena. Rosette was now sitting in the sawdust beside Maple, her back against the horse's massive side. Maple stood perfectly still, providing a living backrest as the girl processed her emotions. It was a picture of trust that spoke louder than any words. "The Jenkins family called this morning," Cordelia said quietly. "They want to schedule sessions for their twin boys. That would put us at capacity." "Good problem to have," Jasper replied, though his mind was already working on solutions. They would need to expand, perhaps add another trained horse, maybe hire additional staff. The afternoon brought the weekly staff meeting, held in the farmhouse kitchen that had become the unofficial headquarters of their operation. Marlowe reviewed client progress, Quincy discussed veterinary care schedules, and Ulysses presented the financial reports that showed the farm was not only breaking even, but actually generating a modest profit. "We've had 3 inquiries about adult programs," Marlowe announced. "Veterans dealing with PTSD, adults with anxiety disorders. There's clearly a demand, and we've got a waiting list of families wanting to board their horses here," Quincy added. "The reputation of the farm is spreading, but the most important news came from Brielle, who had become the unofficial junior ambassador of the program. Mrs. Peterson from the school district wants to bring a group of special education students for a field trip next month, and the newspaper wants to do a story about Maple." As the meeting wrapped up, Jasper found himself thinking about the day 6 months ago when Maple had refused to load into that trailer. At the time, it had seemed like the final straw, one more problem in a series of insurmountable challenges. But now he understood that it had been the beginning of everything. That evening, as twilight painted the pasture in shades of purple and gold, Jasper walked out to visit Maple. She was grazing peacefully, surrounded by the other horses who had found their way to the farm over the past months. Some were retired therapy horses. Others were boarders whose owners appreciated the farm's philosophy of treating animals as partners rather than property. "You saved us all, didn't you?" Jasper said, offering her an apple slice from his pocket. Maple accepted the treat with her usual grace, then nuzzled his shoulder in the way she had done 1,000 times before. But tonight, the gesture felt different, less like a request for attention and more like a confirmation of something they both understood. The farm was no longer just a piece of land where animals were kept. It had become a community where healing happened, where second chances were given, and where the simple act of walking alongside each other could transform lives. As Jasper headed back to the house, he could see lights in the windows and hear the sounds of his family preparing dinner. Cordelia was staying through the weekend, and Brielle was already planning next week's activities. The future, once so uncertain, now stretched ahead with purpose and possibility. Behind him, Maple continued grazing, her massive form silhouetted against the stars. She had made her choice 6 months ago, and in refusing to give up, she had taught them all what it meant to fight for something worth saving. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply plant your feet and refuse to be moved until the world remembers what really matters. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the world actually listens.